Peter Anastasiou got his start in Big Pharma with the likes of Lilly and BMS. But before too long, he followed the siren song of Biotech and never looked back. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech JPM 2025 edition, and I'm here with Peter, who is now CEO at Capsida Biotherapeutics. Peter had a few stops along the way, and those stops are on the agenda for our talk about the lead up to his tenure at Capsida and how he's navigating the ebbs and flows of the gene therapy space. Peter, it's great to see you again.
Nice seeing you too. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time out of a very busy week to spend with the Business of Biotech.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, so I want to start with you and get a little bit of background on where you came from and what you've done prior to Capsida. You got your start, like I said, in Big Pharma and in sales and marketing. So tell us a little bit about that, and tell us about when you sort of moved from sales and marketing and transitioned to a management role.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I had a fairly traditional start to my career, Big Pharma, Lilly and BMS. I was at Lilly 12 years, BMS 3 years, and started always on the commercial side of things. But even when I was in commercial in most of that time at Lilly and all of the time at BMS, I was really embedded in working cross-functionally with R&D. At Lilly, I was embedded into a drug development team that was focused on coming up with a successor for Prozac. Prozac was the biggest drug for Lilly at the time. So we had this, it was like a Manhattan Project to get a successor to the important franchise that was already created. So I got a deep exposure to drug development, even though I represented the commercial function by being embedded in that team. And I saw the value of what we were doing in terms of commercializing a product was only possible if we had products to commercialize. So the discovery team, all the preclinical work that was going on, the clinical work, certainly regulatory, is what enabled us to ultimately commercialize those products. And so I had a desire as my career progressed to want to be involved more broadly in drug development and later commercialization, and not just commercialization.
Mm-hmm. Were you, I imagine that having that experience in commercialization, the allure of building is great.
Yeah.
But when you do that, you sort of give up the rush and excitement and adrenaline and of success, right? Of commercialization. Was there any kind of push-pull going on there? Or?
No, because there's a different level of adrenaline. And, so as I moved later on in my career to, even being more involved in drug development and eventually overseeing all the operations for later when I was at Lundbeck in North America, there was a different level of enthusiasm and adrenaline. Every time a study would be unblinded and looking at the study results, or even, making the shift from phase 2 to phase 3, and how do you design, a phase 3 program that captures all the important elements of phase 2 and not makes a lot of changes, because obviously the more changes you make, the more risk you take that the phase 3 won't repeat. But at the same time, you learn things from phase 2. So it's that knife's edge of how do you, make the necessary changes without making too many. So there were always these sources of adrenaline, excitement, enthusiasm, regulatory, negotiating labels with the FDA, and what, can you get into the label, which then enables you to tell your story commercially. All of those things were different levels of a rush.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, all the stuff that we do is to get a medicine to patients. And so there's a lot of those points that create a lot of enthusiasm, sometimes some tears. There's a lot of failures along the way, but it hooked me, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was Lundbeck the first stop post Big Pharma?
No. So I was after BMS, I actually joined a med tech startup. That was my first entrepreneurial experience. Mm-hmm. So it's not quite biotech, but very similar, venture-backed, cash strapped, having to do things on a shoestring budget. But we developed a product, first of its kind in the CNS space, got it FDA approved, and then launched it. So, being part of that whole journey. And then at Lundbeck, Lundbeck is a 100-year-old company, but in the U.S., Lundbeck didn't have any presence. They had always sold their products through other companies, primarily Forest Pharmaceuticals. So I got joined as part of their concerted effort to build out into the U.S. So at first I came on board to be the head of a business unit, to create a business unit actually from scratch, which we did. Then I became the chief commercial officer across all the commercial functions and all the products, and then became the president of U.S. and then later North American operations.
Yeah. So, we're going to get into, some of the more scrappy kind of entrepreneurial experiences, but did Lundbeck set you up for what was to come, or do you feel like, I was just kind of curious about how well resourced, being an old company, established company overseas, how well resourced you were here in the States?
It was very similar to like a biotech. I mean, we were setting up things from scratch, setting up processes, setting up systems, SOPs, and building things from scratch. And, the way I think about it is we had one venture investor, and that venture investor was the headquarters in Copenhagen that funded our build out in the US. We had to deliver for the investors. We had to report back to the investors. So it was a very similar experience of going from, very little, kind of a little bit of an embryo, and then growing and building, and the growing pains that come from that. And all of that has been applicable to the kind of stuff that we're doing at Capsida. And so that's, I love that experience, and I wanted to get back to that an experience like that, which is ultimately what drove me to Capsida.
Yeah. So Lundbeck didn't necessarily feel like it came with a safety net.
No, well, not necessarily. I mean, we had investors that expected us to perform, and those investors were the headquarters. And so anytime we had a company we wanted to buy, a partnership we wanted to do, if we wanted to do a DTC campaign, which is a huge investment, all that had to be aligned with, the main investor back in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
So a lot of parallels and similarities that I really learned from, and that I apply every day in what I'm doing at Capsida.
Yeah. Did you go from Lundbeck directly to Capsida?
I did.
Okay. And you've been there for 3 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what have you observed in that time that you've been at the helm at Capsida in terms of sort of the macroeconomic environment that you've dealt with? I mean, the thing that, you can draw your own assumptions. You think about the past 3 years in biotech, but tell us about it, firsthand perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My timing, not for Capsida. Capsida has been great, but for the macro environment, my timing couldn't have been worse. I was joining Capsida January 2022, right off of 2021, which was the best year in biotech ever, arguably. The fundraising environment was great. The investments people were making, the progress that people were appreciating, investors were appreciating because of the COVID pandemic, our industry and what we do, and we're willing to put money behind it.
Right.
And then that kind of came to a screeching halt in 2022,
Sure did.
Right around the time I was joining Capsida. So that was a challenge to deal with. And, we navigated through it very successfully. And a big part of the way we navigated through it is we have great investors in Westlake and Burson, great support and great guidance that they give us. But also we embarked on a partnering effort. And so throughout 2022, we talked to a lot of companies, but all ended up towards the end of 22 and beginning of 23, consummating new partnership relationships with Lilly, and then an expanded partnership with AbbVie. And so those were great validation of the work we do, but also were an important source of capital for us to not only support their programs that we just partnered on, but also the other work we were doing in terms of building capabilities and moving our own programs forward.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, and what you can share about how you established those partnerships, like what mechanisms went into making those partnerships happen.
Yeah, well, I think it all starts with having something that people want, and that comes from solving challenges that exist. So we're in the genetic medicine space, specifically gene therapy, and gene therapy has had so much promise and some really good successes with like Zolgensma and Elvetis with and DMD with Sarepta, but also had a lot of challenges too. Some safety issues, underperformance issues in terms of efficacy, but also commercial performance. And so what we do is we exist to solve the challenges that some of those many of those first generation gene therapy space. And so the partnering effort really is by starting by having a solution to a problem that exists. And so specifically what we focus in on is delivery. So, a lot of these gene therapies are using naturally occurring viruses like Biotech, like AAV9. And for certain tissue targets, that's great. Like if you're targeting the liver, you inject it in the IV and most of it accumulates in the liver. So that's no problem. But for other targets like the brain, where there's biological barrier, like the blood-brain barrier, it's really tough to get to the brain. And so what we do is we engineer capsids. We take those viruses, we engineer them to be able to cross the blood-brain barrier. And we're not just CNS focused, those are elite programs, but any tissue that has a biological barrier, which most do. So getting tropism to where you want to go, and at the same time engineering them to not accumulate where you don't want it to go. And in this instance, the liver. So, and as a result of that, we're able to deliver IV. So it all starts with the solution that we're offering to the problems of first generation gene therapies that a lot of these pharma companies have had. So that's what enabled us to get a lot of meetings. We kicked off at this meeting, JP Morgan 2022, a partnering process. And it was because of that solution that we have that we were able to get those meetings. We showed them the progress we were making. We have a great CBO who has great relationships and managed a beautiful process. And that's how we ended up having not just one partnership, but two that came out of that effort in 2022.